What was that? What the hell was that? That was the only question that kept running through my head. It had been almost a week since Hurricane Harvey had slammed into our little town of Seabreeze, New Jersey, a Category 4 storm with winds reaching speeds of 150 miles an hour, causing widespread destruction along the Jersey shore. I had boarded up the windows of my home and hunkered down with some canned goods and bottled water in anticipation of the worst. I lived on Ocean Avenue, yes, but my street was also several blocks from the shore. Even if the tide came in really far, which it did during full moons, it would never reach my house. I mean, it was almost a mile from my front door to the ocean, and yet there it was, crashing against my lawn. As I stood there watching in disbelief, I realized that the rising water was no longer restricted to my front yard. It lapped against the steps leading up to my porch, then started to climb the walls. The water was now rushing toward my front door, crashing against it with increasing force. I could feel the vibrations in the floor, in the wall. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the impact, but the water didn't come in. I opened my eyes to see the water lapping at the threshold, inches away from seeping inside, but it stopped. It didn't come in. The salt water was freezing cold, sending shivers down my spine despite the thick robe wrapped around my body. The water was still rising, and now it was up to my waist. I had to get out, had to find higher ground. I stumbled out of my house and ran toward the safety of higher ground. Behind me, I could hear the ocean roaring, crashing, relentless and hungry, consuming everything in its path. Maybe I was safe. Maybe I'd made it. But then I heard it again, that loud, bellowing sound, followed by a crashing wave. That was the only question that kept running through my head. It had been almost a week since Hurricane Harvey had slammed into our little town of Seabreeze, New Jersey, a Category 4 storm with wind, reaching speeds of 150 miles an hour, causing widespread destruction along the Jersey shore. I had boarded up the windows of my home and hunkered down with some canned goods and bottled water in anticipation of the worst. And although my power had gone out almost immediately upon the storm's arrival, it had miraculously returned just 2 days later. But now, as I lay in bed trying to sleep off the adrenaline rush of surviving a once-in-a-lifetime hurricane, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that something was wrong. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror. The water that had receded was now surging forward again, crashing against my door, forcing their way inside. I huddled in the corner of my bedroom, pulling my knees to my chest as I watched the waters slowly engulf my house. The seawater had breached the curb and was now pouring into the street. Bile. And although my power had gone out almost immediately upon the storm's arrival, it had miraculously returned just 2 days later. The waves crashed against each other as they forced their way up the hill, their momentum carrying them farther and farther inland. I flailed wildly, trying to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing. I struggled to get up, my mind screaming at me to get away, to escape the rising water. Coat, I had to get out, but the branch wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, my nails digging into the wet sand, my muscles burning. Finally, with a cracking sound, the branch shifted, freeing my legs. I scrambled to the surface, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. But my legs wouldn't move. They were pinned underneath something heavy. I looked down to see that a fallen tree branch had landed on them, anchoring me to the floor. I was in too deep. The current was pulling me under. I struggled to keep my head above the water, gasping for air as the icy cold liquid filled my lungs. Salt water, sand, and debris were forced up my nostrils, making it hard to breathe. Fear choked me, stealing my ability to scream for help. They flowed around road signs and telephone poles, surging relentlessly toward my house. Had they all evacuated? Was I the only one left behind? In the distance, I heard the wail of sirens, but no one was coming to help. We were on our own. I sank to the floor, defeated. There was nowhere to go, nothing I could do. All I could do was wait and hope for the best. I could hear the roar of the ocean growing louder and louder, drowning out all other sounds. It was like the sea itself was alive, breathing heavily as it crept ever closer to my door. But now, as I lay in bed, trying to sleep off the adrenaline rush of surviving a once-in-a-lifetime. But there was none. The ocean had cut off my only means of escape. I could have driven away, but my car was on the opposite side of the street, trapped by the encroaching waves. I tried to call 911, but the line was dead. I wasn't alone. Other houses were in the path of the rising tide, and people were frantically fleeing, their cars abandoned, bare screams swallowed by the deafening roar of the sea. A hurricane. I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that something was wrong. It was around 4 a.m. when I first heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind snatching up some loose piece of debris and flinging it against my bedroom window. But then it happened again, followed by what sounded like a loud splash. I sat straight up in bed, listening intently. It sounded like someone had let out a giant bellow, followed by another loud splash, like something heavy hitting the water. I listened closely. Was that the ocean? The beach was about a quarter mile from my house, but I knew that even if the tide came in really far, it would never reach my home. I was well above sea level, and the nearest I was to the ocean was my front lawn. But still, I got out of bed to check. I threw on a robe and walked out into the hallway, peering out the window. The living room window was big picture glass, almost floor to ceiling. It looked out over the front yard and down to the beach, and it was through this window that I saw it, the ocean. It wasn't visible from my bed, so I hadn't noticed it before. But now I could see that my entire front lawn was underwater. I stepped back in shock as the ocean continued to rise, lapping against the base of my house. I ran to the bedroom window to get a better look. What in the hell? How was the ocean so close? How was it in my front yard? And why was it getting closer? My house was built up high, well above where the waves normally reached. I watched in horror as the water climbed higher and higher, creeping closer and closer to my house. Adrenaline surged through me, propelling me into action. I raced around my house, desperately searching for a way out, a way to escape the rising tide. I stumbled back into my bedroom, my mind racing. What was happening? Why was the ocean rising so fast? Where was everyone? The water continued to rise, inching closer and closer to my house. It was like a scene from a movie, surreal and terrifying. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. I screamed as the water flooded in, sweeping me off my feet. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying face down in the water, my body aching, my lungs burning. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed against the branch, trying to free my legs. The water was rising, lapping at my chest. But there was no time to rest, to catch my breath. I never looked back. I don't want to know. What was that? What the hell was that? Every night at precisely 2:47 a.m., my skin crawls and my blood runs cold as I hear the slow, deliberate footsteps approaching my front door. But who could it possibly be? Let me explain. My dad had recently put the house up for sale. At first, I thought it was just because the house was old and settling due to the summer heat. I didn't think much of it until one morning when I woke up and noticed that my door had been wide open the entire night. I patched up the hole and continued living in the house as normal. But the incidents kept happening. These questions echoed in my mind as the days passed. But the unsettling feeling that something was watching me never went away. And then the footprints returned. Bah! I sat up and listened intently. Footsteps were coming closer. Then I heard a voice whispering my name right by my ear. Something was definitely inside the house with me. And though I couldn't see it, I could feel its presence lurking nearby. Biff. As I peered out into the darkness, I noticed a set of footprints leading from the beach to my front door. They were wet and muddy, as if whoever had made them had just come from the ocean. But how could this be possible? The footprints were clearly visible in the sand, yet my front door was locked, and there was no other way into the house. Then I saw it. A pair of wet footprints in the sand, right outside my bedroom window. The man stepped into the room, and his smile widened. "I've been looking for you," he said. There was something about his tone, something in his eyes that told me he was hiding something. Before I could respond, the man lunged forward and grabbed my arm. I screamed and tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. Fear surged through me, and I tried to stand up, but my legs buckled beneath me. I lay still, hoping whatever was out there would pass me by. But then I heard a voice. Hello. The voice was close now, and I could hear the person breathing heavily. Is anyone there? I collapsed back onto the floor and cried out in pain. I tried to move, but I couldn't feel my limbs. Then I heard a loud bang, and the footsteps came closer. I felt a sharp prick, and then everything went black. Still, I lay, perfectly still, pretending to be dead. But the more I struggled, the tighter his grip became. Then I felt something sharp pierce my skin. I looked down and saw a small cut on my arm. Blood welled up and I thrashed wildly, but it was no use. The man only tightened his hold. He flicked the flashlight on and off, creating a strobe effect that made me feel queasy. I spun around, but of course, there was no one there. Then I saw it. Another pair of wet footprints on the floor. Groaning, I slowly sat up and scanned the room. Everything was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. Panic started to set in. Where was the man? What had he done to me? Had he killed me? The man took a step closer and I instinctively took a step back. "Don't be afraid," he said. His voice was low and hypnotic, and it seemed to send shivers down my spine. "I'm here to help you." In the darkness, I couldn't see what was there, but I could feel its presence closing in on me. Then I heard it again, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps approaching my hiding place. Then I felt something cold and wet touch my forehead. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. B loomed over me and I could feel its hot breath on my face. Then it leaned closer and whispered, "I've been waiting for you." Adrenaline surged through my veins as I realized the footsteps were coming closer and closer. They were right in the shape of the front door. Someone or something had just walked in. They were identical to the ones I had seen before. Large, muddy, and unmistakably human. Whoever or whatever was leaving them had come from the beach. But how could this be possible? My eyes, still adjusting to the darkness, struggled to make out the figure standing in the doorway. As the room slowly came into focus, I saw a tall, imposing man with a flashlight in his hand. He was smiling, but there was something about his grin that sent shivers down my spine. The only way to reach my bedroom was through the front door, which was locked from the inside. Paralyzed with fear, I couldn't move or scream. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stayed in bed, paralyzed by terror, unsure of what to do next. One night I was awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of the front door creaking open. As I strained to listen, I heard footsteps near the television in the living room. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. When I finally gathered the courage to get out of bed and investigate, I found that the front door had been unlocked and the television was turned on. I quickly changed the channel and waited for whatever was watching TV to leave. After a while, I went back to bed, only to be awoken once again by the sound of footsteps on the roof. I rushed to the window and saw a dark figure climbing through the hole I had repaired. With a start, I realized that this creature wasn't a squirrel or a bird. It was far too big and far too human. It let out a loud screech and disappeared into the house. I screamed for help, but nobody came. I ran to the kitchen to call the police, but the line was dead. It was then that I noticed the creature's footprints on the floor. They were large, wet, and muddy. It seemed like it had come from outside, but how could that be? The windows and doors were locked. I checked outside and saw that there were no signs of forced entry. It was almost as if someone had opened the door from the inside and left it open overnight. I shrugged it off and thought nothing of it until it happened again the next night. I tried to convince myself that I simply forgot to close the door the night before, but my memory is usually impeccable. I knew that I wouldn't forget something so important. So, before the real estate agent showed it to potential buyers, we decided to rent it out to anyone who would pay. And what better way to spend the summer than living by the shore? However, I soon realized that the house was quite creepy. It all began when I decided to stay in my family's beach house alone for the summer. As soon as I moved in, I started hearing strange noises throughout the house. I started getting extremely creeped out and considered moving out. But then I decided to give it another chance. Maybe it was just my imagination. Then, one night, while lying in bed, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, heart pounding. I looked out the window and saw a pair of feet walking on the roof. The footsteps slowly approached my room, and I watched in horror as they stopped right above my head. Bye. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited for whatever was up there to go away. But after a few seconds, I heard a loud thud, followed by silence. Was it a raccoon, a squirrel, or maybe even a bird? I cautiously made my way to the door and slowly opened it. Peeking outside, I saw nothing but leaves, relieved that whatever it was had flown away. I closed the door and went back to bed. In the morning, I checked the roof and found a huge hole where whatever it was had apparently crawled through. The next morning, the footprints were gone. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I going crazy? One night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard a loud bang, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. And then it happened again, driven by curiosity and a sense of foreboding. I got out of bed and slowly approached the window. Just then, I heard a noise that sent chills down my spine. The sound of someone clearing their throat right behind me. Terror gripping my heart, I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, and a voice boomed, "Turn on the lights." "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What do you want?" I whispered, my eyes fixed on the flashlight, but I wasn't convinced. "Let me go," I yelled, struggling to free myself from his grasp. "It's all right," he said softly. "You won't feel anything." Just then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor with my head against the wall. Then I felt something wet on my arm. I looked down and saw that the cut had reopened. I could feel the blood trickling down my finger. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The footsteps stopped right beside me, and I could hear the person shuffling around. Before I could react, it pressed something cold and hard against my neck. It's not like I didn't try to warn her. I think we all know the feeling of walking into your new vacation. Spot kicking off your shoes, kicking off your flip-flops, letting your feet sink into the carpet, throwing your beach bag down onto the floor, and just breathing a sigh of relief as you finally get to relax. And since neither of us could afford to travel far, we decided on a local beach house about 30 minutes away. The house looked just like it did in the photos, and we quickly got to work on while Sarah went through the fridge to see what we would need to pick up at the store, I went to check out our bedroom. She said she felt awful and wanted to stay in bed while I went to the beach. So I kissed her goodbye and headed out the front door. This time we found a nice seafood restaurant and enjoyed the live music and dancing. We had such a good time. At first, all you can see is a white rectangle with the edges tinged slightly with color. I couldn't bear to look at it any longer. I kept expecting to see those eyes staring back at me, even though I knew it was just a piece of paper. Now back to the story. When I heard what it was, my blood ran cold. She had found the Polaroid camera in the car. Apparently, it hadn't been there when we left the house. Sarah didn't want to take it back. And disposable camera film doesn't have dates on it. But the photo did. I searched for that and found an answer. On the back of the photo was the date. August 22nd, 1983. So we weren't the first people to stay in that house. And whoever stayed there before us had a Polaroid camera just like the one we found. But how could they have taken a picture of us if they died 36 years ago? She said that she couldn't bear the thought of whatever entity that camera was connected to coming back with us. We were dealing with something much, much worse. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out these other stories. And remember, stay tuned for new episodes every week. Thanks for listening. I understood where she was coming from, but I also wanted answers. I wanted to know what that camera was and where it came from. And most of all, I wanted to know who those men were in the photo. But there was no time to dwell on the photo. We had to get out of there. I ran to the bathroom to splash water on my face and try to calm down. What the hell was that photo? Who was that guy? And why? Was he taking a picture of us? Was he the reason why the curtains were drawn shut the night before? Slowly but surely, though, the image begins to form. That's exactly what happened with this photo. As soon as we were on the road, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I told Sarah we needed to stop and take a break, because I was too anxious to keep driving. We finished filling up the car and hit the road. The drive home was silent and uncomfortable. Neither of us spoke for the entire 30 minutes. As soon as I got home, I went straight to my computer to search for answers. I typed in everything I could think of. Haunted beach house, men in black suit, Polaroid camera. Nothing came up. It was like the house and the camera and the photo were all just figments of my imagination. So we pulled into a gas station and got out of the car. I walked into the bathroom and splashed water on my face again. When I came out, Sarah was talking to a man in a uniform. I walked over and asked what was wrong. She told me that she had found something in the car. At first, all we could make out was a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. As the seconds ticked by, we started to become clearer. The dark shape became a man. He was tall and thin with long, greasy hair, and he was staring at us. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that he wasn't alone. Behind him, standing just out of frame, was another man. He was shorter and stockier than the other one. He didn't have any hair. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide and staring. I don't want to sound dramatic, but it was like looking into the abyss. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart, and the things that lurked beyond were taking a peek through the hole. When we returned home, we were both exhausted and went straight to bed. I didn't wake up again until the next morning. I checked my phone and saw that it was time for us to check out. I shook Sarah awake and told her we had to get up. She groaned but slowly started to get up. She yawned and stretched, and then her eyes landed on something sitting on the bedside table. It was a Polaroid camera with 2 pictures in it. I pulled the pictures out of the camera. One was of the TV, and the other was of us asleep in bed. I spent the morning swimming in the ocean and building By the time I got back, Sarah was feeling a little better. We decided to spend the rest of the day lounging by the pool. It was large, airy, and bright. The bed was huge, draped in white linens, and there was a big flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. I walked over to the window and threw open the curtains. It overlooked the pool and the small palm trees that lined the beach. Then I noticed something. Someone had drawn the curtain shut the night before, and it seemed odd. I tried to shake off the feeling and headed downstairs to meet Sarah in the kitchen. It was a last-minute decision, and so we jumped at the chance to book it when we saw the listing online. All the pictures looked great. There was a pool, hot tub, fire pit, a full kitchen, and enough bedrooms and bathrooms that we wouldn't have to squeeze into one bed together. It was going to be perfect. But then there's that one weird thing in the room that ruins it all. You know, like a picture hanging crookedly on the wall. A dirty towel hidden behind the door. Or maybe even just a misplaced shoe. Once the sun began to set, we decided to head into town to find some food. We drove around for a while, but everything seemed to be closed or really crowded. So we ended up heading back home and ordering pizza. After dinner, we sat out by the fire pit for a while, enjoying the heat and the peace. As the night wore on, we talked about everything and nothing, just enjoying each other's company. Eventually, we started to feel tired and headed inside to get ready for bed. Just something out of place that makes you wonder who was here before you. My friend Sarah and I had rented a beach house for the weekend. We both desperately needed a break from our jobs and our lives. We spent Friday morning packing up our things and hitting the road. We made it there by lunchtime. The rest of the afternoon was filled with unpacking, swimming in the pool, and reading. When I woke up the next morning, I felt refreshed and ready for another day at the beach. Sarah, however, was not feeling so well. As the evening drew on, we got ready to go out again. If you've ever seen a Polaroid picture before, you know that they take a little while to develop. Sarah and I screamed and ripped the photo in half. We gathered our things and practically ran to the car. I didn't look back once. If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps us a lot. Thanks. I didn't want to argue with Sarah, so I agreed to leave the camera behind. Then I remembered something. The camera wasn't loaded with Polaroid film. It was loaded with disposable camera film. That's when I realized that we weren't dealing with a haunted house.